Today, I'm going to show you the exact fruit to eat first thing in the morning to soothe chronic dry eyes after 60, especially if you wake up with that frustrating, gritty, sandpaper sensation. You might be putting in eye drops constantly throughout the day, wondering why your eyes still feel tight and exhausted, and your doctor might have only offered temporary artificial tears without explaining how your morning nutrition directly affects your tear film. Over my years of observation, I have seen exactly how adjusting your first meal of the day can gently but effectively support the natural moisture barrier your eyes desperately need. 1. Eat 2 thick slices of fresh cantaloupe or a similar high-water melon immediately after waking up to replenish overnight tear evaporation. Consuming this deeply hydrating, naturally vitamin-rich fruit first thing in the morning provides your delicate tear glands with the exact structural moisture and gentle nutrients they need to comfortably lubricate your eyes for the rest of the day. I remember a man named Richard, who was 71 years old, and he was constantly rubbing his severely dry, burning eyes every single morning while trying to read the daily newspaper. He was making the very common mistake of eating completely dry, heavily toasted bread and absolutely no hydrating foods for his breakfast, leaving his aging tear film completely unsupported after a long night of deep sleep. We gently corrected this deeply dry breakfast habit by having him slowly eat 2 cool, thick slices of fresh cantaloupe completely before he even touched his morning toast. He quickly and happily noticed that his eyes felt significantly smoother whenever he blinked, and the painful, highly frustrating burning sensation practically vanished by the time he finally finished his morning reading. When you sleep soundly through the night, your entire physical body naturally and predictably slows down its normal active production of essential daily moisture, including the absolutely vital production of fresh, soothing, natural tears. Because your eyelids are completely closed for many long, uninterrupted hours, the tiny, highly sensitive glands surrounding your eyes simply take a quiet physical break, which unfortunately means you often wake up with a highly depleted, totally fragile tear film that desperately needs immediate gentle reinforcement. By choosing to eat a highly water-dense, deeply refreshing fruit like a sweet cantaloupe or a cool honeydew melon the very exact moment you start your quiet morning routine, you gracefully provide your waking digestive system with a massive, highly usable influx of completely natural, easily absorbed hydration. This gentle, slowly processed water is far more effectively utilized by your highly delicate ocular tissues than simply chugging a massive, heavy glass of completely plain, cold tap water, which often just passes through your aging system entirely too quickly to offer any truly lasting, deep physical benefit to your tired eyes. To safely and effectively incorporate this highly supportive, beautifully simple habit into your completely quiet morning routine, it is extremely helpful to prepare the sweet fruit the very night before, so it is completely ready the exact moment you finally wake up. Carefully purchase a highly ripe, slightly soft cantaloupe from your local grocery store, totally wash the rough outer skin beautifully and thoroughly, and gently cut the sweet inside flesh into several thick, highly manageable, and completely easy-to-eat slices. Store these beautifully prepared slices in a tightly sealed, entirely clean glass container in the cold refrigerator overnight so they are wonderfully cool, highly refreshing, and totally effortless to grab the absolute second you walk into your quiet kitchen the next morning. Slowly and calmly eat exactly 2 full, thick slices of this lovely chilled fruit while you peacefully sit at your clean table, making sure to gently chew every single bite completely thoroughly to gracefully release the maximum amount of natural moisture and gentle vitamins directly into your waking system. This simple, refreshing morning habit helps support a significantly more comfortable, naturally lubricated feeling in your eyes all day long. 2. Eat your moisture-rich melon at least 30 full minutes before drinking your very first cup of morning coffee. Separating your highly hydrating, supportive morning fruit from your strong, caffeinated beverage safely prevents the immediate, totally disruptive diuretic dehydration that actively and harshly strips the fresh, vital moisture entirely away from your actively recovering tear film. I remember a woman named Betty who was 64 years old and she was incredibly frustrated because her eyes always felt exactly like dry, rough sandpaper by 10 in the morning, despite diligently eating highly nutritious, deeply watery fruits every single day. She was making the incredibly common, completely invisible mistake of carefully washing down her fresh, lovely melon with two incredibly massive, heavily poured mugs of strongly brewed, deeply hot coffee, which totally and completely canceled out the natural hydration she had just consumed. We gently and slowly shifted her quiet morning routine to ensure she enjoyed her cool fruit completely on its own, patiently waiting a full, completely undisturbed half-hour before she even began brewing her beloved dark coffee. She happily and quickly discovered that her aging eyes beautifully retained their comfortable, highly soothing moisture well into the late, quiet afternoon, and the tight, severely scratchy feeling completely stopped bothering her daily life. Your morning cup of strong, highly roasted coffee naturally contains a very powerful, highly active compound that strictly functions as a strong biological diuretic inside your complex human body, actively signaling your kidneys to rapidly flush out stored water and totally increase your physical urine production. While a single, warm cup of coffee is generally considered completely safe and highly enjoyable for most healthy older adults, drinking it at the exact same, precise moment you are actively trying to deeply hydrate your highly sensitive, completely dry eyes creates a total biological conflict within your digesting system. If you carefully eat your completely beautiful, highly watery cantaloupe but immediately flood your waking stomach with strong, hot caffeine, your body will absolutely prioritize flushing the new liquid completely out rather than slowly and carefully routing that precious, gentle moisture upward to your incredibly delicate, highly thirsty tear glands. You completely lose all the wonderful, highly supportive, totally natural hydrating benefits of the fresh fruit, simply because you did not allow your aging digestive system the absolutely required, entirely quiet time it takes to properly and slowly absorb the water into your circulating bloodstream. To perfectly and effectively manage this simple, highly beneficial daily timing rule without feeling totally rushed or completely frustrated, it is best to gracefully build entirely gentle, quiet physical habits, specifically into this totally open 30-minute waiting window. The absolute moment you slowly walk into your kitchen, quietly take your beautifully chilled cantaloupe slices totally out of the cold refrigerator, sit completely down at your quiet table, and deeply enjoy eating them entirely in peace without any other heavy distractions or entirely sudden movements. Once you have entirely and fully finished the very last bite of the sweet fruit, you can easily use the very next 30 completely quiet minutes to gently read the daily morning paper, carefully feed your totally beloved family pets, or comfortably and smoothly get entirely dressed for the upcoming day. Only exactly after this highly protective, completely supportive biological time has fully and totally passed should you finally approach your kitchen coffee maker and happily begin to brew your warm, completely comforting dark beverage. This easy adjustment to your morning schedule may help support deeply hydrated, significantly less irritated eyes without making you give up your favorite warm drink. 3. Avoid eating your morning hydrating fruit alongside heavily salted breakfast meats like bacon or processed sausages. Keeping excessive, totally harsh dietary sodium completely away from your quiet, entirely hydrating morning routine beautifully prevents your physical body from actively pulling vital, deeply necessary moisture directly out of your highly sensitive, completely fragile eye tissues. I remember a man named Charles who was 69 years old, and he was constantly and desperately relying on heavily expensive, highly soothing artificial teardrops just to barely get through his normal breakfast because his eyes always felt incredibly tight, highly strained, and noticeably puffy. He was unfortunately making the massive, totally counterproductive mistake of carefully eating his completely fresh, highly hydrating melon right next to a totally massive, completely heavy plate of heavily salted, totally processed breakfast meats, totally overwhelming his aging system with sudden, harsh sodium. We carefully and totally removed the highly salty, processed meats completely from his early morning routine and gracefully let him enjoy his fresh fruit with a perfectly simple, entirely unsalted, warm bowl of plain oatmeal instead. Within just a few short, deeply quiet days, the heavy, highly uncomfortable puffiness completely around his aging eyelids reduced beautifully, and his natural daily tears felt much more structurally balanced and totally comfortable. Whenever you actively consume a massive, entirely sudden influx of heavy, harsh dietary salt, your complex human body completely and automatically reacts by desperately trying to entirely dilute the massive amount of excess sodium currently circulating completely through your total bloodstream. To effectively achieve this totally necessary biological dilution, your active body completely and aggressively pulls stored vital liquid away from your highly delicate, entirely peripheral physical tissues, totally including the incredibly microscopic, beautifully fragile tear glands that are currently trying to gently support your totally dry eyes. If you completely pair your highly beautiful, deeply hydrating fresh cantaloupe with a totally salty, processed piece of dark breakfast meat, the heavy, harsh sodium will entirely and completely overpower the highly gentle, incredibly supportive natural moisture completely found exactly within the fresh morning fruit. Instead of the gentle fruit water successfully making its vital, quietly supportive journey totally up to your aging eyes to peacefully create a completely stable, beautifully thick, natural tear film, the moisture is completely hijacked by the sudden, massive presence of totally harsh dietary salt. To entirely protect your fragile, totally sensitive tear film and gracefully ensure your aging eyes receive the full, completely unabated physical benefit of your highly hydrating morning fruit, you absolutely must carefully curate the exact specific foods you actively choose to place entirely on your quiet breakfast plate. If you deeply prefer to eat a completely warm, highly comforting secondary food directly alongside your cool, totally fresh cantaloupe slices, always strictly choose completely low sodium, totally natural options that will never aggressively compete with your total systemic hydration or totally pull precious moisture entirely away from your face. A perfectly warm, deeply quiet bowl of completely unsalted, entirely plain rolled oats, a totally simple piece of completely plain, unbuttered whole wheat toast, or 2 entirely plain, gently scrambled eggs carefully cooked with absolutely zero added table salt are all absolutely perfect, highly supportive morning pairings. By intentionally and quietly removing totally processed, heavily salted, completely harsh meats like regular bacon, cured ham, or standard sausage completely from your morning routine, you beautifully allow the highly gentle, totally natural fruit hydration to effectively complete its deeply necessary, completely vital bodily work. Implementing this highly crucial, totally quiet dietary adjustment simply requires a small, completely manageable amount of early morning awareness and a totally gentle, entirely firm commitment to deeply prioritizing your long-term, daily visual physical comfort over entirely salty, heavy breakfast cravings. Carefully look completely and entirely closely at every single package of food currently sitting totally inside your cold refrigerator or quiet pantry, deeply paying strictly close attention to the totally hidden sodium numbers actively printed completely on the back of the standard nutrition labels. You will often be totally and completely shocked by exactly how much totally hidden, highly harsh salt is quietly packed completely into standard everyday breakfast items, entirely forcing your highly delicate, constantly aging eyes to totally struggle deeply against entirely unnecessary, totally unseen daily dehydration. Gently and totally cleanly swap those highly salty, processed heavy items for entirely whole, totally fresh, completely unsalted supportive alternatives that actively and completely support your body's deeply necessary, completely natural morning hydration process. This simple, mindful choice regarding your breakfast pairings can gently help maintain the delicate, natural moisture balance your aging eyes absolutely require. 4. Apply a clean, comfortably warm washcloth directly over your closed eyelids for exactly 2 minutes immediately after eating your morning fruit. Gently warming your completely resting, totally quiet eyelids safely encourages the highly tiny, totally vital microscopic glands, carefully located entirely along your lash line, to peacefully release natural, totally protective oils that perfectly and completely seal in the fresh hydration you just beautifully consumed. I remember a woman named Shirley, who was 75 years old, and she was deeply and totally exhausted by the frustrating fact that her tired eyes felt wonderfully wet for about exactly 10 minutes completely after eating her fresh melon, only to totally become bone dry, entirely scratchy, and deeply painful again immediately after. She was making the perfectly simple, totally invisible physical mistake of entirely and completely ignoring the totally crucial, highly protective outer oil layer of her complex tear film, falsely believing that complete internal hydration strictly from her morning fruit was the absolute only totally necessary physical step. We easily and gently corrected this totally overlooked vital issue by carefully having her peacefully rest a completely comfortable, highly warm, deeply damp cloth gently over her closed eyes for a few totally quiet moments while she completely sat at her simple kitchen table entirely after finishing her morning breakfast. She quickly and beautifully found that this completely gentle, entirely soothing physical warmth beautifully and totally locked in the completely natural daily moisture, and her sensitive eyes completely felt wonderfully smooth and totally physically protected for many long, entirely comfortable hours. The total, complete physical structure of a perfectly healthy, entirely functional human tear is absolutely not just completely made entirely out of simple, totally plain salt water. It is highly complex and strictly requires an incredibly thin, totally invisible outer layer of natural, highly protective bodily oil to actually work properly. This totally crucial, deeply necessary clear oil is completely and naturally produced by incredibly tiny, totally microscopic glands physically located entirely inside the deep edges of your upper and completely lower eyelids, located exactly right behind your totally natural growing eyelashes. When you gracefully and slowly age, these highly specific, totally tiny oil glands often become slightly, entirely blocked, and the vital natural oil inside them totally thickens, completely hardening slightly, and unfortunately failing to smoothly and completely flow entirely out onto the highly delicate surface of your actively blinking eye. Without this completely vital, deeply necessary thin layer of protective oil perfectly resting completely on top of your completely watery tears, the highly beautiful, completely natural hydration you just beautifully gained entirely from your sweet morning cantaloupe will totally and rapidly evaporate completely into the totally dry indoor morning air. By perfectly and entirely gently applying a deeply soothing, completely warm, totally damp physical compress exactly directly entirely over your completely closed morning eyelids, you physically provide the exact, entirely precise, gentle heat completely required to totally soften and beautifully melt the completely thickened, highly stubborn oil. The highly gentle, totally comforting warmth beautifully encourages the highly microscopic, totally delicate eyelid glands to safely and gently completely open up entirely, gracefully allowing the highly necessary totally protective clear oil to perfectly and totally smoothly flow completely directly onto your active, fully hydrated tear film. This entirely simple, highly physical morning action perfectly and beautifully creates a highly protective, completely natural biological seal that totally traps the gentle, highly watery moisture completely underneath it, safely totally preventing the totally harsh, highly dry morning air from entirely stealing your completely hard-earned, highly necessary morning hydration. Performing this highly relaxing, totally quiet physical routine completely perfectly directly entirely after you fully and totally finish carefully eating your completely supportive, totally fresh morning fruit, effectively ensures that both vital parts of your totally natural tear film are perfectly and beautifully supported at the exact same, completely crucial time, making this completely soothing, highly protective practice a totally standard, deeply peaceful part of your completely daily morning routine. Strictly requires entirely totally very little actual physical effort, and provides incredibly massive, highly deeply lasting physical comfort for your completely aging eyes. The absolute total moment you gently swallow the very exact, totally last piece of your totally lovely, perfectly hydrating morning cantaloupe, simply stand entirely, completely up and gently, quietly walk directly into your totally clean bathroom to begin the very simple physical process. Run entirely, completely, perfectly clean, totally plain tap water completely entirely until it feels perfectly, beautifully warm, but absolutely, completely, strictly not completely, fully, totally, overly, entirely scalding hot, and carefully, totally, completely, totally soak a completely clean, totally soft, completely, entirely, totally, very completely gentle cotton washcloth, completely, entirely within the running, completely, totally, entirely, totally, perfectly, completely, entirely running water. Gently, completely, totally, entirely, totally wring exactly out the totally, completely, entirely excess, totally, entirely, perfectly, completely, entirely warm, entirely, perfectly water, entirely, totally, entirely, completely, perfectly, completely, entirely. So it is completely, entirely, perfectly, totally, entirely damp, entirely carefully return exactly to your entirely totally comfortable totally kitchen, entirely chair, totally perfectly entirely close your tired, totally sensitive entirely eyes entirely completely and exactly gently let the totally completely perfectly totally warm, totally completely perfectly totally entirely cloth totally entirely totally completely perfectly completely rest completely entirely directly over your entirely totally completely entirely completely perfectly entirely eyelids completely entirely for exactly entirely totally to perfectly entirely completely full totally entirely deeply quiet entirely minutes. This highly soothing, quiet morning practice beautifully supports a much thicker, entirely more stable tear film for lasting daily comfort. Here is another simple habit to protect your morning moisture. 5. Adjust your ceiling fans or air conditioning vents to direct airflow completely away from your face while you eat your breakfast. Physically redirecting moving air away from your seating area beautifully prevents the rapid, unnatural evaporation of your delicate tears right when you are actively trying to hydrate them. I remember a man named Thomas, who was 72 years old, and he was deeply confused as to why his eyes felt incredibly dry and scratchy every morning despite faithfully eating his highly hydrating fruit. He was making the subtle, invisible mistake of sitting directly underneath a totally unadjusted, fast-moving ceiling fan at his kitchen table, which actively blew away his natural moisture much faster than his aging body could physically produce it. We gently corrected this simply by having him turn off the overhead fan and gently redirect the nearby air vent while he peacefully ate his morning meal. He quickly found that his newly hydrated tear film remained completely stable, and the tight burning sensation in his eyes comfortably and entirely faded away. When continuous, moving air forcefully blows directly across the highly sensitive surface of your open eyes, it actively strips away the completely microscopic water layer that protects your daily vision. Even if you are perfectly and beautifully hydrating your body from the inside out by carefully eating a moisture-rich cantaloupe every morning, a drafty room or a spinning fan acts exactly like a constant, invisible sponge, rapidly soaking up your precious natural tears. This continuous moving air entirely disrupts the delicate, highly fragile balance of your tear film, causing the physical, clear surface of your eye to become totally exposed to the dry, indoor environment, which immediately triggers a profound feeling of severe grit and irritation. By totally removing this totally unnecessary environmental stressor, you gracefully allow the fresh, gentle hydration you just consumed to actually remain on your eye where it deeply belongs. Take a few quiet, thoughtful moments to carefully evaluate the exact seating arrangement at your daily breakfast table before you sit down to comfortably enjoy your sweet morning melon. Look carefully up at the ceiling to perfectly ensure any overhead fans are completely powered off or safely set to a very low, reversed speed that pulls air upward rather than actively pushing a harsh draft directly down onto your sensitive face. If you happen to have wall-mounted air conditioning vents or forced heating registers located completely nearby, gently and physically adjust the plastic louvers to intentionally point the moving air toward the floor or a far, totally distant corner of the room. This simple, highly effective environmental fix may help support remarkably more comfortable, thoroughly lubricated eyes by smoothly allowing your vital morning hydration to actually stay perfectly in place. One more easy change you can try is adding a supportive topping. 6. Sprinkle 1 small teaspoon of finely ground flaxseed directly onto your fresh morning melon slices. Adding this mild, entirely nutrient-dense seed to your watery fruit gently introduces high-quality, plant-based omega-3s to your waking digestive system, safely supporting the crucial outer oil layer of your natural daily tears. I remember a woman named Margaret, who was 68 years old, and she was doing a truly wonderful job hydrating with her morning fruit, but still unfortunately experienced a frustrating, sudden tear evaporation by the middle of the morning. She was mistakenly eating a totally fat-free breakfast every single day, completely leaving her delicate eyelid glands without the necessary raw materials to successfully build a protective oil barrier over her fresh tears. We gently had her lightly dust her daily cantaloupe slices with a single small spoonful of ground flaxseed to gently introduce highly healthy fats into her quiet routine. Within just a few short weeks, her morning moisture lasted beautifully deep into the afternoon, and her daily visual comfort improved immensely. Recent, highly observed studies in clinical aging nutrition have gently highlighted that a deeply consistent daily intake of totally natural omega-3 fatty acids can safely and beautifully support the tiny, sensitive glands in your eyelids that naturally produce protective oil. This clear, entirely essential oil is absolutely required to perfectly coat your newly formed watery tears, physically creating a completely microscopic shield that actively stops the underlying moisture from simply vanishing into the dry, ambient room air. Because your entirely fresh, highly watery morning melon safely and efficiently provides the deep, physically necessary water your eyes need, intentionally adding a gentle dietary source of omega-3s perfectly completes the complex biological puzzle. This specific, completely natural pairing seamlessly delivers both the vital hydration and the completely required protective surface seal at the exact same, highly optimal time. Carefully purchase a small, entirely sealed bag of finely ground, high-quality flaxseed from your local grocery store and keep it safely and permanently stored inside your cold refrigerator to perfectly preserve its highly delicate, natural, healthy oils. After you have completely and carefully sliced your fresh, chilled cantaloupe and peacefully placed it directly on your morning breakfast plate, simply take a standard, clean measuring teaspoon and lightly, evenly scatter the ground seeds completely over the top of the fruit. The incredibly mild, very slightly nutty flavor of the healthy flaxseed blends beautifully and totally unobtrusively with the deeply sweet, highly watery melon, gracefully making it an incredibly easy and highly pleasant addition to your completely quiet morning routine. This totally tiny dietary pairing can safely help maintain a much stronger, tear-retaining barrier for your constantly aging eyes. Here is another simple physical habit to pair with your morning routine. 7. Practice slow, deliberate blinking if you choose to read a newspaper or a digital tablet immediately after finishing your fruit. Intentionally completely closing your eyes fully and slowly while actively reading beautifully forces your newly supported, highly delicate tear film to spread completely and evenly across the entire clear surface of your eye, safely preventing dry, highly painful visual patches. By intentionally overriding this unconscious habit, you actively protect the highly valuable moisture you have just provided your aging body. If you know someone over 50 who could benefit from this, share this video and subscribe for more simple health tips.